You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
And hello, everyone. Welcome to Enemy of My Enemy. I am Hodey Johns.
And I'm Brian.
And I'm Jacob.
And this is the show that brings you all kinds of perspectives, libertarian perspectives on different issues. Today we got a good one. It's been hot in the libertarian community, and it's one of those that's going to kind of be hot in every community, especially this time of year during Christmas time. And we're going to be talking about the libertarian solutions to homelessness. This has been getting a little bit of traction. I have like half of the participants that are talking about this heatedly blocked, and about half of them have blocked me. And so I only know that it is being discussed because somebody like screenshots it and it kind of goes my way. Now that's not bragging. I don't handle fighting very well, and I wish I handled it better, but, it's just the way it is. Now, that being said, I think it's a very interesting conversation, and it's one that warrants a lot of discussion. We've had I think it's hard to issue kind of a non-controversial libertarian take about homelessness, because at some point somebody is going to say, well, do we have to do that? Or is that the real libertarian solution? I thought the libertarian solution was just do nothing and see what happens. So I'm just going to set the ground floor here with a couple of quotes. One is from Benjamin Franklin. And he says, "I am for doing good to the poor, but I think the best way of doing good to the poor is not making them easy in poverty, but leading or driving them out of it. I observed that the more public provisions were made for the poor, the less they provided for themselves, and of course became poorer. And on the contrary, the less was done for them, the more they did for themselves and became richer." And so that's a lot of the smacks on kind of brutalism, but that's kind of his idea. The other quotes, and these are kind of the famous ones going around right now. They've been around for a while. This was from January 1992. Murray Rothbard at this point has left the libertarian movement and joined the Republican Party officially, and established something called right-wing populism, or joined something called right-wing populism. And he actually has a very short article called "What is Right-Wing Populism?" In it, he lists 8 planks about what a right-wing populist program is. Planks 3 and 4 are the ones that have kind of been getting the traction, especially when it comes to, planks 4 and 5, my mistake, are the ones that have been getting the traction when it comes to homelessness. Plank 4 states, take back the streets, crush criminals. And by this, I mean, of course, not white-collar criminals or insider traders, but violent street criminals, robbers, muggers, rapists, murderers. Cops must be unleashed and allowed to administer instant punishment, subject, of course, to liability when they are in error. Plank number 5, take back the streets, get rid of the bums. Again, unleash the cops to clear the streets of bums and vagrants. Where will they go? Who cares? Hopefully they will disappear. That is, move from the ranks of the petted and crosseted bum class to the ranks of the productive members of society. Now, considering that libertarians draw on a little bit of Benjamin Franklin and a little bit of Murray Rothbard, I think there's a lot of concern over what the libertarian position is. And indeed, I would say at this point, there's a schism enough in the movement that it's hard to say that there's any one libertarian answer to it. I know I have a preference. I know that like the libertarian platform kind of has a preference, but there's some nuances here that it's hard to just say, well, this is the platform plank and the thinking has been done, so don't think for yourselves. Brian, I'm going to let you start on this one and give us your thoughts about kind of what you've heard, what you've seen, your ideas about the libertarian solution to homelessness.
Yeah, the libertarian solution that's based off of that, which, don't care what happens to them. Well, that's what happens in Chicago every January and February when the temperature hits -70 wind chill. And that's what a lot of people think, should happen to the homeless, unfortunately. And that's a terrible fate to give someone who has probably got either significant mental or behavioral issues. And yeah, I'm not saying behavioral issues as criminal. I'm just talking as antisocial, unable to live with people in general. Living in a group facility or things like that, some people just can't do it. So looking at it from a libertarian perspective and the idea of just, don't care about it, it's really kind of anti. I mean, I guess if you want to be paleo, kind of on that sense of, hey, I am only worried about me and that's it. That's fine, but that's a really lonely society, and I don't think any of us want to live in that. I'm supposed to be the right winger here, law and order, blah, blah, blah. But the law kind of loves the homeless. It gives them a reason it gives them a foil, not only something to fix, but something to fight. And so you look at like in places like San Francisco, where homelessness is through the roof in one of the most expensive cities in the world. And you drive up Nob Hill and there's lines and lines of tents on the sidewalks and stuff. And the police aren't able to do anything. They're unable to do anything about shoplifting because, well, they've changed California law because of the problems with bail in California. So, but this gives the government even more of a, you got to help them, but you got to do something about it. And so they say, oh, we can solve both problems at the same time with more money. And that's what usually happens. Gets poorly spent. Famously, Orange County, California, decided to go out and fix their homeless problem by renting motel rooms for everybody for a few months that was homeless. Yeah, that was cheap. And that's how they got around, because the homeless were camping in front of the courthouse, and we can't have that going on. So they booted them into the hotels, and the lovely people of Orange County paid for it. Thank you. Again, the government loves the homeless, not only because it gives them a reason to exist, but keeps the money coming in to help / fight what's going on.
Awesome. Jacob, your thoughts?
Well, there's a lot of nuance in this conversation that doesn't happen on Twitter, which is rarely where nuance is going to happen anyway.
Gasp.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like on one hand, I think we would all agree that in general, this is one of those situations where prevention is better than cure. I think ideally we would all agree as libertarians that, free markets tend to be more prosperous. And even though I'm, probably more right than Brian in a lot of ways, I'll even use a term that's very anti-right. It's probably they're generally more equitable even though I'm not somebody who's, big on equality. Free markets do tend to be a lot more equitable than centrally planned markets that tend to, have a distribution that's really highly favored towards the top. So
thank you, Comrade Jacob.
Right. Well, I'm filling in for Lou tonight, so I don't know. Maybe
thank you.
The spirit, my inner leftist is coming out in spirit, I guess. I don't know. But that being said, it's one of those things where the philosophy can become hard for us to imply in principle, because it's like, okay, well, we know free markets would solve this, but we don't have free markets right now. So what do we do? And a lot of libertarians, including a lot of libertarians that are, generally on, I guess, like that I run with, have been, quoting that Rothbard quote lately about, using the cops to solve this problem. Now, on one hand, I understand a little bit of where Rothbard was coming from and where people like Dave Smith and others are going with this. When you're having conversations with like your neighbors, especially in the areas where this is a problem, because that's another part, is that like homelessness is not a problem that's like the same in every community or the same in every state. Like here where I live in kind of like a suburban, red county, kind of like half suburban, half rural county in Pennsylvania, we really don't really have a homelessness problem. And the little bit that we do is like, you have to kind of go seek out the places to find it. They're not at the parks where children are at. It's a little bit different than, say, like Los Angeles, where you have a giant problem with homelessness. And we can get into the numbers on that later. But so in the areas where it is a problem. If you're trying to appeal to your neighbor, it is a very hard hill to die on to say, yes, there are a lot of people in these areas that are supposed to be for your kids, and they're taking up space. A lot of them are probably using drugs. There's needles being left around. This is not an environment that you want your kids to be in. And it's hard to reach people who are engaging in just your normal everyday statist, high time preference mindset to, convince them that police are not the answer to this. I do think that it is true that police are not the answer for this, but that's not an answer that's going to be immediately explainable, especially because most people who we're going to be trying to convince this of, like, they aren't even red-pilled on free markets yet. They aren't red-pilled on the police yet. So to them, this is a conversation that's very hard to have, and it might be one that, like, strategically is not the first conversation you want to have with somebody when you're trying to maybe convince them of the libertarian worldview. That being said, as far as like talking about what the solutions are, we have to also highlight what they aren't. And I understand where the sentiment comes from about using the cops to do this, but the problem is, there's no way in the areas where homelessness is a problem, the cops are not the answer, or at least the cops are not the answer unless you are willing to accept a giant increase in the number of cops and in the power that they wield. Because in the areas where this is a problem, the cops are already understaffed and underfunded, and they're being asked to deal with a lot of other problems, like the war on drugs, for example, like petty property disputes and all sorts of things that we as libertarians might say, like, okay, well, ideally, we want the cops to only enforce the things that we want them to enforce and not to enforce any of the things we don't want them to do. It's like, well, sure, in theory, but if it was that easy to get cops to do what we wanted them to do and to not do what we didn't want them to do, well, then statism would probably work. You know what I mean? Like, if it was that easy to get politicians and cops to only enforce the things that we want, we wouldn't be in this mess in the first place. So we have to recognize that the incentives are not in our favor here. Trying to get the cops to only enforce good laws and to take off the things where they make their money. And, to be honest, they make their money in the war on drugs, in enforcing traffic citations and doing all these things. And if you act like, well, we can just perfectly centrally plan and engineer to not expand the police force at all, but to get them to deal with, I think I'm dealing with rough numbers here, but I think it's like in like Los Angeles, for example, you're talking about like, I think 70,000 homeless in that county. And with the amount of cops that they have on hand, I did this math last week when this was hot. I don't have my work in front of me. So again, I'm dealing rough numbers here, but generally it's like there's 20 homeless people per square mile. And if you like average it out, and only 2 cops per square mile.
Well, maybe if you average out LA County, because LA County is our view of counties here.
It's a huge county.
Yeah, it's
right. I'm talking about
enormous.
LA specifically. So I'm talking about like in the areas where it's a problem, like the number of cops on hand available to keep them off the streets or to keep them off parks, it's just not available. Unless you invoke some kind of utopian or nirvana fallacy to think that the cops are only going to do the things you want them to do. So this is inevitably going to lead to an increase in cops and calls for them to have more power. And like you said, Brian, give the state, or was it Brian or Hodey? I forget which one of you made this point. Gives the state more reasons to justify its existence. So
I do a lot of work in LA County, Orange County, things like that. There's no way that number is 70,000. There's absolutely no way that is underreported. I have, when you go into Long Beach, which is part of LA County and things like that, there's the long Los Angeles River that comes up there, and there used to be encampments the whole damn way from Long Beach all the way up into there, and that is not a short river. That is several miles, and then underneath every overpass, in town, downtown. When I was staying downtown, we had an office down there. I would walk around homeless people, and I count at least probably 50 of them on the 3 blocks I walk to work. Now, unless they're getting up and shifting and watching out for the fat dude from Indiana trying to make money off of me, there's a lot more than that.
Yeah, I mean, so this problem
it goes to reinforce your point, though,
right? Exactly.
Right,
so these are conservative numbers that I'm probably using. It's hard to say, but it's like a 5,000 mile square radius that we're talking about here, and at least 70,000, if not more, homeless people. And I forget the exact number of cops. I think I have it here. It's like let's see, about 10,000 on duty officers. We could maybe add sheriffs or add some other. You know what I mean? So like somebody 10 and 20,000 hypothetical people that could be on the ground to deal with this. But again, that's if like we got to realize that they're asked to do a lot of things, and we can't just expect that perfectly engineer that they're only going to enforce the good things we want them to do. The solution has to be, I think, taking, well, 2 things. One, prevention's better than cure. Understanding mental health and the huge role it plays into the homelessness crisis. And the economic factors, and understanding that as we promote more free markets in society, this will alleviate a lot of the economic pressures that lead to homelessness. The second answer is, we need private market solutions to the homeless problem. And part of that might be able to come just from the market itself. But I think I'm going to cater to my side of things here. I think that religious institutions really need to play a huge role in this solution as well. And it doesn't have to just be Christian. If mosques want to help out, if Jewish temples want to help out, if Unitarian churches want to help out, I mean, I don't care. Like any religious or humanitarian institution out there, if you want your streets to be cleaner, if you want your parks to be safer, then we need to promote a proactive outreach into these areas to help solve these problems, to deal with that triage while we're trying to work towards a better long-term solution. And we have to also recognize that there's no permanent solutions here. And some people have certain issues to them that are so hot that even if they're libertarian minded, they can quickly fall back into that knee jerk, like, no, this problem is so bad that we can't wait for long-term solutions. And we just need, coercion and the power of the state, and just end this now. And again, like there's some problems that, this one doesn't hit home for me because it's not a problem in my area. There are certain problems in certain areas. Oh, hey, Craig's a friend of mine. Question: are we ignoring the fact that homeless problem is due to the fact that the state even exists? Well, no, we're not ignoring that. Like we said, free markets would be one of the best preventions to homelessness in the first place. And while the state is, also let's talk about, how much of this homeless community are probably veterans and are, mentally traumatized by serving in the military. I mean, there's so many ways in which the state creates this problem in the first place, and that can't be understated at all. So that's a very good point, Craig. But yeah, we have to be cognizant to not let things that we're emotionally triggered by trigger us to the point where we invoke the state and forget about the long-term consequences of doing that. But yeah, I am sympathetic to the fact that this is a harder one to preach to normies who aren't red-pilled on that. But that's why it's even more important for us to not advocate that, at least within our own circles. Because like we do understand this stuff. So we to ourselves, we should be able to talk about those solutions openly. When we're engaging with the public, you got to pick and choose your battles wisely. And yeah, if I moved into an area with a major homelessness problem, maybe this isn't a hill that I would die on, like I would insist upon heavily. If someone who is not yet libertarian minded thinks the police are needed for this problem, I'm sympathetic to their reasons. We have to engage in that long process of disavowing them of their status mindsets over time, and that might mean focusing on other areas where they're more amenable.
Yeah. I feel you. So for me, the idea is this is kind of a difference between what's our technical policy and what's our culture, and what is our ideas about it. Because I think I would be lying if I said there was any one single libertarian solution to this. And I think one of the beauties of libertarianism is it allows for a variety of solutions. Unfortunately, the police don't really fit in that because that's not really a libertarian solution. But like, there are many answers to this. And there's a lot of people with different solutions, and some are really great and really creative that the state doesn't allow right now, which is unfortunate. Episode 303 of We're Libertarians. It's an older episode back in 2018. One of the best episodes that you'll hear. It was with Mark Warner. He does outreach with for the homeless. He ended up working in politics a little bit, but what he did is he got really creative with it, and he decided to make a place that what they did was they would take some homeless folks in, they would have them work for them, and in exchange they would pay their bills, right? They would say, I'll pay your bills, I'll keep you fed, here's a phone, here's TV, here's a bed, sleep here. And these folks paid for all of that. And what they did is slowly over time enabled them to say, okay, look, you're working for us, because they had like a front, right? It almost sounds like black market, but they had like a restaurant front, and they were like, okay, here's the money we made today. You would get this amount. I'm not going to give it to you right now because you're not in a place where you know how to handle that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this money and I'm going to turn that into an apartment, a phone, your food, some really cool stuff. Hey, you want a trip downtown for the weekend? Yeah, we'll pay for that. And what they did is they slowly showed these people how it worked, and then slowly gave them control of their own finances. And at first, in the same situation, like, hey, you pay us for your rent instead of us just automatically keeping it, right? And unfortunately, the government didn't like that very much. At the time that Chris did the episode, I can't remember if the government had already shut them down yet, but the government was definitely not happy about it and not pleased. It's not a small thing, and I think there's a certain libertarian undercurrent that once what it is what we want to do is we kind of either get tempted to use the state one way or the other, either violently and clear them or give them the money that they need. And I think that there's a place in between there. And I think what that place is, you can teach a man to fish and give a man to fish. Now, if I'm not being a collapsitarian, I would suggest that the government give them some money, teach them to live on their own, slowly take away that money as they learn to live on their own. How well does the government do at that welfare kind of program? They do catastrophically terrible. They waste it, and there's no incentive for them to decrease it. I could show you any number of studies that have shown that this has drastically increased the issues regarding poverty. So there is some truth about the only amount of truth, because I'm definitely not a brutalist, but there is an amount of truth to saying that, yeah, if we just give them money and say it's okay, and like we kind of zone them in a certain area, and you get comfortable in that area, and then that money's either there or it's gone. Right. Like, and I understand there's different kinds of welfare, like food stamps. Right. And it's like, okay, so you got food stamps. Sure. But it's either there or it's gone. And that can be like $400 a month. And all of a sudden you're like, well, I just worked. And if I work this minimum wage job, then I made $600, but I'm losing my $400. So basically what I'm doing is I'm trading, 240 hours of work for $200 a month. I think I'll just take my life right now, like this is good where I'm at right now. Right. And so there's a mentality there, but I think that the important thing is to get out of it. Now, one of my pet peeves, especially with homelessness, we had a big thing with homelessness. So I have some personal experience with this one here in Utah. Right here in Ogden, actually, we made national headlines because our police force was one of the ones that was like, they issued it's illegal to feed them. It's illegal to give them clothing. It's illegal we will stop you from doing this. At first it was just like a gentle discouragement. And then they made it a full-fledged, like, we will stop you if you try to implement any of these solutions that you have. They actually took all of their tents and destroyed them. They had an encampment out here, and they just would come through. They cited a bunch of terrible. I actually put together a list, and I probably should have pulled it up for this episode, but they put together a bunch of terrible excuses, like crime is increased in the area, but it's like the crimes were like not homeless related. They were not homeless issues. They were just, it was just somebody robbed a store, and then they said, well, and then also there's homelessness. That correlation causation thing didn't work out. They said that the fire department had to respond to this bonfire. No, the fire department did respond to a fire that was going in the encampment. They did not have to. It was very much controlled, and they decided to. And I wish I could show that. They were like, people need to walk through this area. And I actually took a picture of it on Facebook. It's like right by this highway. There isn't even a sidewalk there. There is no through traffic that walks through this place. It is not by a school or any of those things that they were saying, and they just wanted them gone. In fact, they didn't, in that part, they didn't even pretend. They just said, well, what we need to do is lock down for a little bit. They will move on, and then they will be gone. Now, part of when the Libertarians here in Weber County got into this problem, Ogden is in Weber County, counties, cities. There's a weird relationship there, but yeah. When we got involved, we found that not everybody was homeless for the same reason. And mental illness, of course, is an issue, right? PTSD, of course, is an issue. I say this I think it's okay to say that most of them have mental wellness issues, because I think most human beings have mental wellness issues. However, we actually had an increase because of a bunch of very young kids, some of them very bright and intelligent. And when COVID was going on and our businesses were getting shut down and money hadn't kicked in, they actually decided to get tents and save money on rent. And so they actually were part of this. And so I was actually shocked at how many of them were cognizant. They just said, we don't want to pay this amount. We're going to sleep out here until this whole thing kind of boils over, because we don't have the money to make our rent. A couple of them even had homes that they decided to rent out during the crisis because rent prices were going up. And so they were like, yeah, we figured we could make a few bucks. And so it was, people are homeless for different reasons. And understanding that is so important when we talk about the solution, because we tend to think of one solution. But again, I reiterate, the beauty of libertarianism is having that number of solutions. Now we can talk about what not to do, right? Government sucks at welfare. Welfare is not necessarily bad in and of itself, because I do think I love the Mark Warner strategy, give them some money, or don't give them some money and then slowly give it to them until they learn to handle it, learn to manage their life. Rupert does very similar things with troubled kids, as far as let me gradually show you how to have this awesome life. And it's great and it's successful. Government doesn't like it, but then what the government offers is terrible. Oh, but also ending the drug war, obviously problems there. Having it so people are allowed to sleep in their car. I mean, who is that hurting? If you're in a legally parked parking spot and you decide to crash in it, that's something. Not having to register your car, that would be a big one as well, especially if people are low on it. The free market would be a massive problem solver for this, because people don't understand exactly how real estate works. And I don't want to get too in the economics, because I understand that this is confusing.
Come on.
Oh, I know. But one of the biggest, in fact, I will even pull this up right now. One of the biggest lobbyist institutions is the National Realtor Associations of America, because they want to stay a monopoly. And here's the problem. When we talk about this bubble, you know why housing gets so many more bubbles than everything else? Because there's only one company. There's only one company that you have to go through. We have all this land. We have way more land. We have way more houses than we have homeless people and families, right? So just the market would say this very simply. When you have an excess of something, the excess is waste. When you have that waste becomes free. Right? Like, this is a very simple thing. But the problem is what we've said, well, no, this waste is controlled and it's not accessible. No one's allowed to have this waste. Right? And they do this with food a lot too. When these, restaurants come by and they're like, hey, we got a bunch of mashed potatoes here and stuff. Oh, you're not allowed to have that waste. I know it's extra and it should be free, but you're not allowed to have it. You're not allowed to do that. Libertarians really do try. And I do want to reiterate, because a lot of people are like, well, why don't you just do it now? Look what food, not bombs, Houston is going through right now. Mm-hmm. They are exercising aggressive civil disobedience under the threat of being arrested And if there weren't the sheer number of them that there were, they would go to prison, right? Because they have engaged in mass civil disobedience. And the police, I believe, even issued a statement saying not that what they were doing was legal, but that right now it's not worth their time to bust them because there's so many of them, right? And they're united. And it's tough getting libertarians to unite, but there's something to it there. One of the problems is people like us, even we here in Weber County, we're a big part of the solution here, engaged in some civil disobedience, but we certainly weren't showing it off. Like, I wasn't going to go in front of a cop and hand a homeless guy a coat. Like, I didn't want to go to prison. I did it, but I didn't want to go to prison for it. And so I wasn't going to let anybody see it. You know, when you have these churches and it's just 3 or 4 people and they'll start pouring bleach in the food and they'll just say like, hey, you guys aren't allowed to feed the homeless. You guys aren't allowed to do this right now. Some cases, they even have the permit that they're allowed to, and the cops bust it up anyway. And then they're like, oh, I guess we made a mistake and they were allowed to do it. You know, and so what happens as a libertarian is you say, well, we have these solutions, but we're not allowed to implement them. And you have to be willing to break the laws to implement a lot of these. And you have to be willing to work with the law, which is also kind of crappy as a libertarian, to say, you need to have to apply for this permit. You need to have this amount of hot water. It needs to be running. You need to have access to electricity. You need to have access. And when you're just like, I've just got a pan of mashed potatoes. Like, that's what I'm offering tonight. You know what I mean? Why can I not do this? You know? And look, I understand. And they always issue this great, oh, I hate this. Oh, it's for their safety. This hasn't been under quality control. We haven't checked it. It might not be safe for them. What if they get sick? You're letting them die in the streets right now. Don't talk to me about what happens if they get sick when they eat some mashed potatoes, right? This is the whole razors and Halloween candy thing, which has never once happened in the history of ever, but they make it look like that's what's going on and it's rampant. And like, man, I guess 1 or 2 might get a cold or something, but like, I mean, please, right? They're starving to death. Allow
Hodey, Big Brother looks after you.
Yeah,
Brother loves you.
Big Brother,
and that's the thing, is that's just why government loves the homeless, because number one, they make it so that no one can live in certain areas, basically the poor. If you look at California, and this is what I was going to talk about here. California sets it up to where only certain developers can set up in certain areas. They have planned communities like Irvine and things like that. These are all planned communities. So the plan didn't have where are the people who are going to pick our strawberries and stuff are going to live. They're going to live out in the desert. So, and that's what these people want to have happen. And it's disgusting, but it's just what government does. Government sits there and says, we're going to do what we have to protect you. We know this big book of law, which should be this thick, leading it. And we can interpret it any way we want. And I'm going to address Reinhold's comment right there, if we can reverse it back, that libertarians should be leading this effort, but they aren't, which is sad to me. You know, I'm trying to remember if there's this guy in Indiana who's doing something. We just mentioned him earlier. What was his name? He also ran for governor of Libertarian under the Libertarian ticket. So, you know, I think maybe Rupert's doing something. Yes, we should do more, Reinhold, obviously, but there's literally only so much we can do in the realm of what the government wants to do. And if the government wants to keep the homeless because they make housing unaffordable, because they're in the pockets of big real estate developers who then want the vagrants thrown out of their prissy little new houses that they can't sell because of the bubble, then they get stuck with the homeless coming around there. The police come in, push them out to another place where they don't want them, and the cycle keeps repeating and repeating and repeating. And throughout the entire time, we have all these government agencies with these highly educated people who took thousands of hours of classes to learn how to deal with the homeless, drive up in their BMWs and say, hey, here's an 800 number you can call to go ahead and see if they can get you on a list. That's literally what happens in a lot of these cases. Yes, they have people who do outreach, and there are some people who do a wonderful job, but the government's set up to keep these people homeless over and over. And he's right that libertarians should be leading this, but to say that we aren't and that it's sad is, I think, completely false. So.
One of the things that that I wanted to highlight too is, as much as like maybe for decades, the homeless problem might be driven by mental health issues or zoning issues, and I think that's all valid. But there's a very good chance in the future that we might see more issues with homelessness being caused purely by economic stuff. I mean, just think about how crazy things have been, how crazy inflation's been, the economy after the lockdowns. I can even, here's a talking point. What about people that lose their jobs because they aren't complying with the, vaccine requirements, which is another hot topic issue in libertarian circles. But there's a lot of ways that people can, be perfectly skilled, productive people, but fall on a bad lot of luck. And things happen that, they might not be homeless forever, but they might be, a week or two, month or two, or whatever. And hamburger helper, come on, Hodey. Big, like I said, Big Brother's just trying.
Elastic Giraffe. He's dropping some awesome bombs here. Hodey, that box of Overstock hamburger helper is simply too dangerous. 2 days expired. Yeah, you can't eat it at that point.
I'm sorry that you fixed up this wonderful food for these people. We're gonna go ahead and pour bleach all over it as opposed to going
the
through.
Stories about bleach on food during when COVID hit
Kansas City.
Yeah, I mean,
that was it. Yeah,
it's just awful. I mean, and you know what, Hodey, you brought up a part about churches there, and I just want to comment on that a little bit too.
Yeah.
The churches are way too focused on obeying the letter of the law and not the commands of Christ. And I know this isn't a Christian podcast, but I'm going to take a quick 30 seconds to call that out.
I take minutes. Have fun. Yeah.
If when Jesus says that which you've done to the least of these, you've done unto me, and you're more concerned about your 501c tax status but Romans 13 says to submit to governing authorities, which I mean, I don't even want to get into that. That's a whole rabbit trail right there. But most important thing I think is what Jesus told us to do. He told us to be light and salt into the world. He told us to love our neighbor. And if you're more concerned about the consequences of your actions by a satanic state than you are for following Christ, especially if you're a church leader, you need to question your priorities, I think, a little bit. A lot of this problem could be solved. Libertarians could be leading the charge. Reinhold, you're right. But I'm, although I wear the libertarian hat, I also, the first hat I wear is that of a Christian. And let me tell you, if Christians were doing what Christians were supposed to be doing, this would not be a problem. And so we need less Joel Osteens, and we need more people doing things like what Foods Not Bombs does, and more people, put Romans 13. Submit to the governing authorities, which, Paul wrote half the New Testament in jail, but, always submit to the governing authorities.
Of course. Yeah. No, I know you and I could both go off on that one. And you have had to several times. Every time you discuss your Christianity with libertarians, you have to talk about Romans 13. We'll hold off on that.
I need a shirt. I need a shirt that just says Romans 13. Instead of Marode, it's Romans 13.
Yeah. I think I want to see more happening. I do love the religious institutions. I think religious institutions, and I don't think, like you said, like libertarianism, it's incompatible. So let's say libertarian is just too big a tent and we can't come to a single conclusion of what to do. Well, then fine. Have libertarians working with your churches. Have libertarians working with the Boy Scouts. Have whatever. Have libertarians working with whoever to do what you need to do. The Food Not Bombs thing. Yeah, that's not a libertarian initiative. Are there libertarians who are working with that initiative? Oh, hell yeah. And I think that that's something you need to be ready to do. Weber County libertarians could not have done what we did for the homeless in Ogden unless we had non-libertarians that we could work with. And yeah, we took some leadership on it. And we were the ones that were kind of talking about civil disobedience and doing it anyway, right? But we met plenty of other people that were down with doing it anyway that didn't want to overthrow the city council tomorrow, and when we said, okay, well, we can work together with you on this one and fix this issue, really great things that you can do. if you are passionate, especially about homelessness, I guess I'll throw out a plug here. The Vermin Supreme Institute, if you want to donate money to them, they actually will help you get set up, or actually they'll donate money to you to get set up, to kind of to help like build a homeless like food storage on your property if you want to do that, and they'll work with you there. It's just a good place if you want to get all that started, regardless of your feelings about the goofiness of Vermin Supreme. But they're good on that, and it's something that you can actually do if you're just sick of kind of sitting around whining about it and watching it. Different places suffer with this in different levels. We're kind of back to our pre-COVID levels here in Ogden. That's not to say we've eradicated homelessness, but it's certainly 1% of the size of what it used to be, and a lot of that had to do with a lot of help and donations and what we did. And I just think it's a matter of finding solutions. And maybe everybody wants to find that solution within the Libertarian Party. And I will say this, like, maybe the philosophy doesn't tell us how to help the homeless, but like I said, that needs to be used as an advantage and not a disadvantage. I do think it is fair to say, if you are pressed and somebody just won't let it go, it is fair to say, yeah, libertarians don't believe in welfare, and we're just not going to give money to the government to do it for us. Okay. Like, if that's the bad news, then that's the bad news. Now, I don't, in line with, again, my Christian values, Jacob, what you were saying, I like to do the gospel. I like to do the good news thing. Let me tell you the good news about libertarianism. Too many libertarians are they want to lead with the bad news. There's this shock value, right? This edgelordism that we say, I want to lead with the bad news about homelessness. I don't think that that's the right solution here. And I don't think you have to be scared, because I think part of it, and I recognized it during this podcast, I said, this is a trap. This welfare thing that the government has you on, there's a right way to do it, and they do it the wrong way. And so, yeah, should we eliminate them doing that? Yes, we should. Does that mean we don't give fish or teach fish anymore? No, absolutely not. Like, that's what we as libertarians, I want 1 million ways to give people fish and 1 trillion ways to teach people to fish. And the more we have access to that, and the more we can do that, the more we can actually take care of these communities that the government has frankly kept trapped forever. And that does involve more than just get rid of the welfare and see what happens to them. There's so many things the government is doing that it needs to get rid of before we can say, all right, get rid of the welfare. And like, I mean, and I did want to bring this up, and I will even finish with this, and I'll allow you guys to kind of finish things off from here. One of my issues with the Rothbard quote, obviously he's writing about right-wing populism and not libertarianism. I understand it's freaking Murray Rothbard, right? Like one of the dopest ANCAPs of all time. Yeah, late Rothbard went right-wing populist. You just have to contend with that. It's something that happened, right? But I think the big issue that I have with him here is that he says, well, not the white collar criminals. I'm talking about the muggers in the street. Well, why not the white collar criminals here? Why not the politicians? Why not the people who steal billions of dollars or millions of dollars and rip people off left and right? Why would you not unleash the cops on them as well?
What should
like
the cops
I
work for?
Right. That's they won't.
The problem.
Right. This is the problem here. But like this is my thing is I think for me, you need, like, the consistency is lacking there, because if you would do it to a homeless person, why is your rage there for a homeless person that you would unleash the cops on them? And believe me, as libertarians, you know what the cops do to somebody when you unleash the cops on them, right? Why would you unleash it on a homeless person, but wouldn't unleash it on like Bernie Madoff, right? Or Ghislaine Maxwell, right? Like, why would you not unleash the cops on these white collar criminals, but you would unleash it on a mugger? Don't get me wrong, guys. Mugging sucks. I'm making absolutely no excuses. I really hate it. This is like kind of like a left-wing thing when you're like, no, it's okay to destroy property or it's okay to rob somebody if it's small, or if you no stealing for anybody, none for anybody. But that's what I'm saying is it's like you can unleash the cops on everybody instead of being like, well, this is kind of pleasant crime and this is unpleasant crime. Like, anyway, that's all I got to say. Please love the homeless, please. And then Brian, Jacob, you should issue some closing thoughts, and then we'll get to the Piece of My Mind segment.
Yeah, the one thing I just want to say about this is, and I'm just going to ask this because I know you two are deeply Christian, and of course, hail Satan here. But I don't think any of us would complain if the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster or Church of Satan or the Agnostics United Front or the agnostic person group, whatever, or the Judean People's Front decide to go out and put together a program that maybe helps some homeless. Guessing none of you guys would have a problem with that, right?
No.
So see, that's the thing, is that I know people are like, but this is more of a larger, societal human issue like that. But there, as Hodey said in the beginning of this, there's hundreds of reasons, thousands of reasons why people are homeless right now. And a lot of it is mental abuse, drug abuse, things like that. But let's, we're a country of 330 million people. Let's find 330 million different solutions and find the ones that work, as opposed to the one that just wants to keep people cycling through the programs. So.
All right. So
Jacob, close us off, buddy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this ties a little bit into my peace of mind later, but it's, I think, an important thing to close this out with on. So libertarianism is often, we talk about it, and even I have said this before, that it's a kind of a thin philosophy, and it pertains to right, and I believe that, again, being usually the guy that comes on here and is the other than Brian, a very right wing guy, Austrian libertarian. I agree in general with the sentiment, at least in a libertarian sense, that all rights are fundamentally property rights, and that libertarianism is about private property. But that isn't all libertarianism is about, and there is a point where you make it too narrow, and to say that libertarianism is just about property rights, and that's part of why some libertarians are coming out against the homeless, is because it's like, well, they're trespassing on, well, it's not private property, maybe it's public property, but still, like, it's public property that's not intended for them. It's intended for children. It's intended for other people, and they're they're trespassing. It's a tragedy of the commons kind of thing. They're posing some kind of threat. Now, obviously, one thing we maybe didn't mention here, like, obviously, if there is a homeless person who is initiating aggression against somebody, okay, call the cops. Like, if a homeless person's coming at you, going after and attacking people, I don't have any problem with you calling the cops on that person, okay? And I hope that goes without saying. Or if somebody's, like, trying to, hand out heroin to kids and something, like, okay, like, there are lines where it's like, I think that's probably not a common everyday occurrence, but
if they're with the razor blades and the greasy cuffs, okay,
right? Like, if you actually see aggression happening, I'm okay with defensive force to protect people, especially to protect children, and I'm very sympathetic to why Rothbard and other libertarians have made this talking point, and I understand where it comes from. I understand where non-libertarians, where their concern comes from. But although libertarianism is about private property rights, the reason why we care about private property rights is because those are fundamental to what our actual end goals are. Because to care about private property rights just for the sake of private property rights is just way too thin. Like, that's like, starving thin. That's like anorexic thin. That's not healthy. We care about private property. I care about private property rights because, as Mises said, those are foundational to what our actual goals are, which are what? Social cooperation and peace among men. And, calling cops on people who are homeless is not the solution. And it actually is antithetical to promoting peace among men and social cooperation. When we go for the knee-jerk, immediate, like, solutions that are really just band-aids for a deeper problem, we are doing a disservice to ourselves. There are many different reasons that people become homeless, and there are many different solutions. And I think we as libertarians should focus on all of those solutions that are out there that don't involve using the police.
Awesome. Thank you for that, both of you. The thin, thick libertarianism, just for anybody who's listening, because it might go over our audience's heads. I didn't know what it was until like a few months ago when I started hearing it pick up more and more. We actually talked about it in the group chat. The thin is kind of like the minimum like line, versus thick, whereas like is everything. So like in Christianity, a thin Christian would be like, as long as you accept Jesus, it's okay. Whereas a thick Christian would be like, you take care of your neighbor, you honor the Sabbath, you keep
you believe in
certain
infant
covenants.
baptism, and you believe in this things about the Eucharist and like all these different things, and
Right.
yeah,
and the
with
blending of fabrics and things like that, and combining fields of corn
and
other
when
things.
people take your apples, you're allowed to shoot them.
Small, no. We use only the finest tactical nuclear weapons.
Right. By thin libertarianism, I mean like only making libertarianism the essentials versus like adding things that maybe are more cultural or maybe more, like not something that everybody would need to be in order to be expressing libertarian philosophy. I prefer it to be as thin as is ideal. But there is a point, I think, where it gets so thin that you're missing the point. If your whole thing for libertarianism is property is God, it's like, that's a problem, because that's not even what Mises believed. Like, the reason Mises talked about private property rights is because they are foundational to peace and social cooperation. And that's our biggest thing as libertarians, is we're pro-peace, right? Like that is why I'm a libertarian, is because I am pro-peace.
The anybody who thinks like, and I think there's times for both. I think there's time to be like, listen, it's this simple, but here's where it goes. Here's where it's leading, and I think that's why it's so important to talk about that when we look at things like, I mean, not just Christianity, but when you look at libertarianism, why are there these thick books if all libertarianism is don't hurt people and don't take their stuff? Well, let me tell you where you go from there, and like, there's a world of awesome that comes from not hurting people and not taking their stuff. If that's the minimum, great, but there's so much more to go from there. I probably register more on the thick libertarian side just because I love it so much, but I'm definitely not a gatekeeper about it. Like, I'm definitely not like and nobody else except for me and my breed of libertarians are allowed to call themselves libertarians. I mean, it's just, the thick can get crazy and the thin can get crazy. And honestly, I think you just kind of understand where you're at. All right. We're going to end this segment by doing a quick little piece of trivia. And I think this will be fun. I said the National Association of Realtors. So they are the number 2 highest as far as bribing politicians at $31 million in 2021. At $26.4 million, can either of you guess who the number 1 institution that lobbies politicians is?
Organized labor.
Close. How about you, Jacob? What do you think? Number 1, single institution.
I know the other one.
I don't know. Brian, what's your other guess?
Defense contractors.
They are actually separate. So you got Raytheon, Lockheed, and Boeing, like all together at that $10 to $12 million range. At $46.4 million, the number 1 people who bribe your politicians, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Other politicians.
True. Yep.
The politicians bribe themselves more than anybody else. And then second, you've got the Association of Realtors. So There's a fun little fact to close out this segment. Everybody, thank you for tuning in. Hang on for just a minute, and we are going to get to the Piece of My Mind segment. And welcome back from the break, everybody. So happy to have you around. All right, Piece of My Mind. I'm going to lead this guy off. So I do Christmas, again, with the Christian tradition thing. One of the things that I love about holidays is the ones that you can share with other people. And there's I think there's so much of an identity focused on exclusivity. But one of the things that I found is that inclusivity is more important to me than the exclusive stuff. So the inclusive stuff that Christians can do for me has more meaning than the exclusive stuff that Christians do. And inviting people to celebrate Christmas for me, I think makes Christmas and Christ, the message of Christ, more universal. I think it's an opportunity for us to share it with everybody. That's just a little opinion thing. But I watched Christmas Carol, and there's this line. I watch it probably every year. I don't really like Charles Dickens. Shoot me. I just don't. But he's a kind of an interesting bird because he was always he intentionally never wanted to get involved with politics. So he had a lot of messages, but he never wanted to say what a political solution was. Now, I do not believe he was an anarchist. I would never pretend to make him that. In fact, I would probably put him in line with more of the welfare style, based on some of his literature. I'd probably put him there. But I respect the fact that he didn't preach for government solutions. He preached for societal solutions. And something in the Christmas Carol that just, it hit me hard this year, and I don't know why, but there's this quote from Jacob Marley, Scrooge's old business partner, who, for those who aren't familiar with the story, he dies and visits Scrooge in the afterlife. He actually introduces the three spirits. He says, hey, you're going to have these three spirits come visit you. So all those three spirits that got famous, he's the not famous one at the beginning. He used to work with Scrooge in life. He forged these long chains, and he's really sad because he is burdened with what he did in life, and that's carried with him till death. And he has this quote that I just think is phenomenal. Because Scrooge says, hey, what's wrong with you? I thought you were always a man of business. And he responds and says, business. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. And it hit me hard because I think I put a lot of stock into, I don't think I'm egotistical, but I'm a very ego-driven person. For those who've kind of familiar with Freudian stuff, I judge myself based on my accomplishments. I'm not a very id-driven person. Like, who am I? I'm very much like look what I did today. Let me show you this thing that I cooked. Let me show you this thing that I fixed. This is who I am. You can judge me by my stuff, And so that is kind of how I judge myself. And I think a lot of that is good, because I think that there's a helpful element to saying, walking the talk, for example, right? I don't like to just talk about what I am. I like to be able to show it off. And I think this shows up in my work. But at the same time, there is a perspective that you have to have about your work, in that I don't think your work, it needs to define your entire life. I think that part of your work, if you look, when you get to the afterlife, or even if you don't believe in the afterlife, right? I just think if you take a step back and look at life and you say, what was the most important business that I conducted? And I got to say, that internet fight that you're having is probably not going to rank as highly as you think. That, man, I really showed that guy up on Facebook or Twitter is probably not going to rank as high as you think. Or even, hey, I stayed an extra 3 hours at work to help people catch up, and I had to miss my son's softball game. I'm a great person. It's not going to age as well as you think when you take a step back and you look at everything. I know I had to make a decision a while back when I was in restaurant management, and it came down to this, and it was, you can work 80-hour weeks for the rest of your life, and I was perfectly capable of doing it. And you'll be recognized for what you do. But here's what you're going to give up. You're going to give up on these moments with your family. What it made me crack one day is I saw this Calvin and Hobbes comic, and it's a silent one, but it's just the dad working. And then Calvin's like, can we play outside? And he's like, I got to work. And then he decides to just let it go. And at the end, Calvin gives him a kiss goodnight. It's just a sweet little cute comic. But I just remember being in joyful tears at the end of it and just saying that's kind of what I'm doing is, hey, I'm sorry, I picked up that extra shift for somebody tonight because this person didn't show up, or we're going to have an inspection on Monday. So I need to stay and make this thing perfect. And I always had people in my life that accepted it. Nobody got upset with me about it. Everybody was like, oh yeah, that's Hodey. He's just a hard worker. That's what he does. But my life is so much richer now for forfeiting that opportunity and deciding to go small ball with my life. I would probably be in a situation where I'd be able to take 3 international vacations a year if I kept on the course that I was going. And now I probably can take none. I might take 1 for the rest of my life. But my life is better because I decided to do that, just on a daily basis. And it's because I'm touched by this quote just because it has so much to do with what my real business here on earth is supposed to be. And it really is supposed to be getting in touch with my community, being really connected here in Ogden with the prisons and the homeless shelters and the runaway teens and all that stuff has been so much more important to me than whether it's social media fighting or staying late at work or whatever it may be. I understand we convince ourselves certain things are important. We get it into our heads and we say, no, like, this is your job. Your job comes first. I understand that. But does it? Like, are you going to look back on all this and say, I'm glad I put my job first? Like, I think jobs are good. I think that's maybe a top 10 thing to have there. I know Jacob Marley says it's a drop in the comprehensive ocean that was his business. Maybe I'd have it a bigger chunk than a drop in the ocean of his business. But I do think that there's some important lesson to learn there. And I just, personally, my life is richer because of it. I hope that resonates with somebody else. One of those many, many stories that I just told. But I hope that you think about it a little bit and do some maybe re-engaging and reprioritizing, I guess, of your life. If you're feeling like maybe you're not doing everything you could do, change it up. There is absolutely no shame at all. You may get shame from like a family member, but again, how much is that going to matter in the long run? If you decide, hey, you know what? I don't need more than a studio apartment. If it's just me and, or maybe if I have kids, okay, I need a few rooms, but do I really need this massive yard? Do I really need it? Am I getting the joy out of it? Am I getting back from it what I am putting into it? Is mankind getting back from it what I am putting into it? Because there's so many simple things that I promise that if you go and you offer your services to a shelter or a Underground Railroad teen runaway situation or what, your work is appreciated. My goodness, there were always plenty of people willing to feed the homeless, but the issue in where we were at was organizing all of the food. They had like people would come in and dump all these boxes, and we're like, oh my gosh, there's flour everywhere, there's these fruits everywhere, and they need somebody to organize it. I promise you that you're going to find a lot of value in that. Now, maybe you're finding value in something else, in which case you can just ignore what I'm talking about here. Maybe you've already made this change. But I know for me personally, I needed to take a time out in my life and just be like, is this really what I want? Because that international vacation, yeah, it would have been fun, but what I'm doing is a lot better, and I'm a lot happier doing this instead of doing that. To each their own. I understand. Take it for what you will, but that's just kind of how I feel about it. You guys, any thoughts about Ebenezer Scrooge?
I liked my international vacations.
Oh, well, there you go.
They were actually really good bonding moments for my kids and me. I've worked from home for the past 20 years plus. So I go away for work and things like that, but I'm home 95% of the time. In fact, some of the times they want me out the door. So it's nice to be able to get away. But the thing is that for me, at least, especially this last year, are you saying that my office is my prison? Well,
this is Elastic Giraffe is giving you an Ebenezer Scrooge quote.
Yes,
are there no prisons? Yes. And the workhouses, are they still in operation?
Yeah, that's right. I identify. I read the story, but it's been so long. So anyhow, there's a lot of and this one, this the perfect evolution of beards. Yep, you're right. I forgot to shave this week. So anyhow.
But you did wear a different shirt.
Yeah, I did, for me, because this is the way. So anyhow,
we have so many like weird inside jokes on this show.
Christy's dropping another one. She says, "Let me see your meat so I can judge it." Yeah, I smoke meat. This is not as sexual as it sounds.
Yes, it is. I've seen some of the things that guys watch.
The way that you take those photos, Hodey. I mean, like, it seems a little sensual for you.
If you ever look at Meat Church and these other programs are like that, it kind of starts getting a little kind of crossing the line here. That is an inanimate object, so I guess there are no laws against it. But
Hodey with his meat cooking is sometimes like the guys who have nothing in their life but like this old car that they've restored 10 times.
Yeah.
It is the attitude, I can tell you right now, is very similar to that. That is what's going through my head the whole time. Like, this is my stuff.
My joy out of smoking is seriously just to watch people's faces and they go, "Oh my God, he can actually do this right." And then I go, "Okay, good. I've accomplished something in this world." The last year, actually, the scary thing is that this last year of COVID and everything else, professionally, has been very rewarding for me. I'm doing stuff now that I'm dedicating a lot of time to, but it's a good reason for it, and it's been very rewarding for me in a lot of different ways. So I kind of take kind of the antithesis approach on this. There's a balance. My kids have always known that when the doors close, I'm working, I'm doing something. Now, if the house is on fire or something like that, obviously come get me. But when the doors open, the doors open. And, there's times, and it gets easier, especially the less kids we have in the house. Now we're down to one teenager who goes to work every day. So he comes home exhausted and passes out and understands the separation between work and home life. So as you said, Hodey, everyone's got a balance to find. Find yours. If yours is dragging you out of the house 60, 70 hours a week to something that's not fulfilling, find a way to make it fulfilling if you're dedicating that much of your life, especially now because people are really in demand in a lot of jobs. I can safely say that if I was doing the same thing I was doing 3 years ago, 4 years ago, might not be doing it now. So,
Jacob?
The whole time you were talking, Hodey, I was thinking of that song, Captain the Cradle and the Silver Spoon.
Yes,
little boy. And then
I didn't actually know like the melody part of that song until like I was an adult, and I was like,
really?
Oh my gosh!
Oh God, that song
go
was
back, unite with my dad.
Yeah,
that song.
Well, I've gone through an actual my oldest son came up to me. This was like last year, and I was working a lot of hours, and I've since cut back. This was part of the motivation for it, realizing I was developing a bit of a workaholic mentality. And he literally was like begging me not to go to work one morning. And I was like, okay, well, Daddy's got to, make money. I got to provide. He was like, well, how much money do you make an hour? And he was like, and I told him, I make this much an hour. He was like, I had that much money in my piggy bank. And I was just like, oh God, that was such a punch in the gut. My son should not have to buy time with his father. You know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, talk about God using your own children to teach you a lesson. That's definitely what I went through. And, it's, it reminds me of, I'm sorry, I can't hide my faith. So I'm sorry if I'm preachy at people, but that's just who I am. I think of stuff from the Bible. I think about things that way because that's how I live my life. And I think about what Jesus says, don't store up your treasures here on earth. The treasures here on earth, they'll fade away. They'll turn the dust. Store up instead for yourself treasures in heaven. And what greater treasure can you store than the time with your family and those things that you can't put any kind of price on. And, there's a lot to libertarianism that's about economics and money and, whatnot. But, libertarianism isn't all that's important in life.
Yeah. It's you know what, Jacob, let's flip it around a little bit. Give us a piece of your mind. What's on your brain?
I am really tired of dogmatic thinking lately. Or I don't know if it's the right term. I'm really tired of people just with every issue, it's like pick a side. With every encounter you have with people on social media, it's like, oh, you're one of them. And it can be anything. It can be you're a member of a caucus, you're a member of a particular religion, you're a particular sports team fan. I don't know. It's just always trying to put people into boxes and then to assume things about that person because of some facet of their identity or some association that they share. And I'm just I'm getting triggered day by day, week by week, more and more, and it's hitting the boiling point lately. I'm just I'm sick of it in so many areas of my life. One, in a religious sense, I'm so tired of interfaith squabbles within Christianity. so tired of people obsessing over denominations and like the finer points of theology and disagreements there. And like, it's like, we hate Calvinists, or we hate Catholics, or we, or that person believes in, is a premillennialist. That person is a preterist. It's like, oh my gosh. Like, I mean, I just get exhausted of it. And the same thing, it's like, I don't know why I thought it would be different, but when I became a libertarian, I just had this idea in my head that libertarians would not be as dysfunctional as the church. But oh my God, it's like mirrored images. Libertarians are just as bad and just as factional and just as judgmental. And listen, I have my opinions. I have my perspectives. I have my associations. I mean, like, and that's inevitable, right? Like, you're going to have things that you lean towards, but that doesn't mean that I'm just intrinsically against picking one thing means hating everything else, right? It's like if I go to a restaurant and I pick out something to eat, that's not a judgment on the rest of the menu. That's like, I hated everything on this menu and I categorically reject everything on this menu except the one thing I picked out, which is the only good thing that you could possibly pick out to eat at this establishment. It's like, no, that's not how life works. You know what I mean? That's not even how the human mind works. It's like, sometimes, and I know it's weird, but humans aren't robots. We actually change. We actually experience things. And like, it's actually okay and natural and healthy to normalize changing your mind on things when you're given new information. Like, and it's okay to admit you're wrong about stuff. And it's okay to like, say, hey, I kind of agree with this group on 80% of things, but not on these things. It's okay to be friends with people that you disagree with things on. You know what I mean? So I'm just really tired of the tribalism and like the dogmatism that exists in so many circles of my life. And I'm a radical individualist at the end of the day. And it's just, to me, it's all like all of this stuff is just different expressions of irrational collectivism and a denial of people's, individual personalities and some like on some level, like a denial of people's humanities at time, where we're just like, I don't know if it's intellectual laziness that it's just easier for people to like pick up some kind of heuristic where they like they pick with something that feels comfortable to them and then they just play it out. And maybe that's easier than just treating each instance, each person, each setting you find yourself in on its own merits. I don't know why that's too hard, especially for people who are, it's like, I mean, I like, other than my family, like the things I care about the most in my life are like my faith and like this thing we do as libertarians. Like I believe in liberty, and I'm just getting really fatigued of people that we supposedly share the same values, but then we end up expressing them in such radically different ways. And I can't even, like, some people might go, oh, it's just, and like, I'm sure there's people listening to this going, oh, well, I don't do that, but this other faction does. It's like, no, like, the groups that I'm a part of and the groups I'm not a part of, like they're all guilty actors in this. And I've even at times got caught up in it myself. And like, we just got to stop. We got to be willing to treat each person we encounter on their own merits and to stop treating people like robots. I mean, the whole reason central planning doesn't work is because of how unpredictable and varied humans are. So, that's the piece of my mind.
Awesome, dude. I totally agree. There's times you're asked to like renounce a person entirely because of like their latest moment. And you're just like, bro, I don't even know what to tell you. Like, specific example this week is like, somebody was like, I won't mention his name because this person's a friend of mine too, but was just like, Spike Cohen's pretty much just a boomer conservative. Like, you can look at anything he says and he's just a boomer conservative. And I said, okay, look, I'm just going to do this from like the last week. Okay. I'm just going to take tweets from his last week where I'm not even deep diving here. And I just brought, I think, like 10 to 12 points or something where I was just like, would a boomer say this? Would a conservative say this? And it's like, and they actually deleted they didn't talk about it with me, but they deleted the post. Right now, my goal isn't cancel culture. My goal isn't I didn't harass him. I was very kind. I was like, I believe I said, hey, I used to be a neoconservative myself. I know what neoconservatism looks like. Let me tell you how Spike does not fit that mold, like from when I was.
Yeah, all the people wanting to cancel Spike, which is again not just one group of people in the libertarian movement.
Right.
People who have a problem with Spike, I'm just like, we're gonna be throwing hands here. Spike is like the man in the liberty movement. So you got a problem with Spike. We're I'm not one to pick fights, but you just picked one. I'll go to bat for my boy Spike.
Right.
I mean,
yeah, it's like he's like the Betty White of libertarianism. If you hate him and it's like hating Dolly Parton. I mean, come on, people.
I think
it's ridiculous.
Like somebody's not for you. Like, so for example, I mean, everybody knows about me at this point. I'm not really a Dave Smith fan, but the thing is he's not for me. I don't need to spend 99% of my time bashing the dude or saying that he's a boomer conservative. I remember when people were being like, oh, he's such a Trumper. And I remember listening to a show where he talked about wanting Trump to be publicly drawn and quartered because of his war crimes. It's just so you guys don't know. You get, what I mean? You say this thing because you have this idea in your head about, I don't even like the guy, but at least you can be like, hey, I can settle for just being like, hey, can't that be enough? Why do I have to go further?
Or the reverse. It's like, I love Dave Smith, but I disagreed with some of his tweets about the topic of today's episode. Right. And it was just but it's like, hey, we can be friends and work together, but have disagreements about, we're not all going to agree the same things. It's like, have you never met people? Is this surprising to you? Right. And what gets really frustrating is then people that I have everything in common with. I mean, again, I've said this several times in the show, I'm pretty far right. I mean, I'm pretty much borderline Hoppian, very strong Austrian libertarian. But then I have people who are also, I have people who are other, Hoppian Austrian libertarians who, again, we would agree on 99% of things, but they're blocking me on Twitter. And when I ask for an explanation, they go, oh, it's because you had a left anarchist on your show. I was like, so wait. So
they're
because
talking about me, by the way.
No, they're not. Maybe some of them are.
Oh no, not Hodey.
But it's like wait. So we can't talk to people we disagree with?
No.
How boring would that be? How can you grow if you live in this sterile echo chamber where you're never confronted with a thought contrary to yours? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy.
No, you're not. But the thing is, there's a few points I'm going to take up with you here. Number one, the restaurant menu, it all generally is crap. And I'm somebody who has the palate of a toddler here. So give me my mac and cheese and leave me alone. But number two, this has been the thing that I think that we all get into the whole, I quote Monty Python incessantly. My apologies for anyone who has no idea what it is. The Judean People's Front of Judea, the Popular Front, People's Front of Judea. All this crap goes back to the splitting and things like that. And it's just what you say, the dogmatic pursuit of what is true. You know what? The thing is, I have some friends who are hardcore Democrat, always going to support, vote blue no matter who type of people. And it's amazing that we agree 80-90% on stuff. Term limits. Term limits is a great one. I mean, my God, that one is so popular across the board. Do you hear it on any of the major media? No, because they're far more interested in telling you that why this person is trying to kill you because they have a personal problem with a vaccine because they've been told by their doctor, or they have conflicting issues because of its source material, things like that. But that they've been told very actively they're trying to kill you, or they're trying to kill you because you're trying to get the vaccine. It plays into the media, it plays into the government, it plays into all these groups who just want to go ahead and get eyeballs and make as much money as possible. And it's sad and it's pathetic, but it's the same thing here. It's the same thing where people sit here and outrage on, this person's not pure enough, or this person's, shouldn't be part of this or that. you know what? Hold a shitty view. I'm sure I hold plenty. Let me go get my kids. I'm sure they'll tell you all the shitty views that I have. But I've grown on some of those shitty views, and some of them I've doubled down on. So it's okay to have a terrible viewpoint if you've got the data that supports that terrible viewpoint, because terribleness is in the eye of the beholder. And it's just ridiculous how we keep doing this. And all the prags and everybody else are kind of mocked and things like that because, oh, you're just trying to be a prag, you're just trying to be a statist, whatever. Fine,
I mean, well, it's
whatever.
like, you and I, Brian, have had a lot of disagreements on this show and in private chats, but it's like, I hope you can always know I come at these things from a place of humility because, like, and I think most of us here do. And I think the problem is some people struggle to express that, which for me, I can't help but do, because I can't help but think it's like, well, I've been wrong before many times, and I've changed my views, to where I'm at today. Like, I don't understand how people get to this point where they go, aha, now from this day forward, I have learned everything there is to know, and everything that I now believe now is correct. None of the times before now, but now everything going forward is unchallengeable. It's like, I just don't get that. It's like, that doesn't mean I'm going to change my mind easily. Like, I do have a high standard of evidence and argumentation that I hold people to move off of things I believe in, but I approach it with a humility to recognize that, I've been wrong before. I could be wrong now. I don't know everything. And anyone who does, I just like, that we could agree on a lot of things, but it's that attitude that I find to be problematic.
Yeah. And if you can never admit that you're wrong in your life, you have either lived you've lived a very boring life, or you've never been challenged. And I'm guessing it's probably the latter. But 2 points I want to make here. Number one, Morgan's point about the campaign for free Galilee. Morgan, I love you. Number two, yeah, that's a deep one. But yeah, the infighting, it's what people come to see. They come to see, it's the whole point of this show too. It's that, but we're supposed to sit here and talk about it. In the chat, we beat the heck out of each other on our terrible ideas. Well, everybody else's terrible ideas, because I'm always right.
Well, Brian nukes people,
I do not nuke everyone, just the ones that steal my apples. And that was my point, was just that the anarchist society, blah, blah, blah. We won't go down that rabbit hole tonight. So anyhow, it draws eyeballs. Some of our greatest episodes that we've had on here have been controversial topics, but in the end, we all agree on 80-90%. And in the 80-90%, that is right, and the 10% is usually the government coming in and thinking they're going to do something. They're going to do something that was written by a paid-off legislature in D.C. who has no clue what the real problem is. Has only been based off of what they've been told in a memo, possibly, or by the person in front of them that's handing them a campaign check, to go ahead and get this bill that they handed them, that they've got enough people to go and sign, look good, do the photo op, and then forget about it and just add it to the federal bill. So, how much to see Jacob hug a libsock?
We'll start the bidding at $1.
Oh, heck. I don't even think I have to bid that high. Jeez.
We'll do it for charity. We're doing it for charity.
Okay.
Charity. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'll throw in $10 just.
I've had an anarchist, mutualist, left anarchist on my podcast. And you know what? We agreed on like 70-80% of things.
Right.
Sure.
I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, so we hyper focus on our differences, but the truth is, like, if we just work together on the areas we do agree, we would get a lot done.
Right. I mean, and I think Jacob, you said this once. I can't remember if I said this on the show before, but talking about it, thinking of it in terms of division of labor, we can't all be good on everything. We can't. There's not enough time. There's people that, we are all, most of us here, kind of generalized libertarians. We talk about most issues a lot. But if you're ever going to excel at something, you've got to pretty much dedicate your life to that issue. I mean, there are people, and I got to say, as somebody who, I got my degree in theology, and I'd study from one person who spent 40 years studying like one book of Ezekiel, or the cultural times of, Jerusalem from 1400 to 1000 BC. and they'll spend, and when I say spend 40 years, they're like, oh, no way they spent 40. No, they spend 40 years of their life. They will write books. This is their whole life. This is everything, right? This is how you study it, and things like this, like when you talk about like global warming, it's like, well, I'm not smart enough to tell you how the atmosphere works. I can watch a YouTube video and kind of gain a general understanding, but I'm not going to sit here and come at you from a place of economic, scholarly, I am so intelligent, you must listen to me because of my work in this area. I've studied an entire 3 hours worth of YouTube videos. Let me tell you how it works. Like, there are people that are smarter than me that disagree with each other, which should probably tell you it's a complicated issue, and so like that should be the signal for it right there.
The more you know, the more you know how much you don't know.
You don't know. Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
There's a humility that you need to it. And I think some of it, is this. It's an attitude of saying, of being able to walk away from the fights when it needs to happen, when you see it happen. And the other one is to not disparage somebody who's your business partner. Like if somebody is focused on economics and libertarian solutions in that area, and you don't find that productive, you don't have to go at them. You can talk about social issues. You can spend your life talking about do your specialty. If you feel I like the generalized, because my speech and debate past makes me so that I can pretend to know a lot about a lot of issues. And that's what I'm good at doing, is pretending to know a lot about different issues with, literally
wordsmithing.
Yes. They give me here's an hour and a half of preparation time. Now pretend you know more than a college professor, right?
Somebody said like a month ago, was like, libertarian podcasters are really good at taking 10 minutes of content and stretching it out to be an hour and a half. I was like,
I'm doing exactly that. Oh yeah.
Yes.
No, this is going to happen.
What's wrong with that?
Yeah. I feel personally assaulted here. Yeah, but like, okay. So anyway, what I'm trying to say here is, it's like, you don't talk smack about their economics. What you can do is say, you know what, we're not there, on this issue, on economics. I don't see eye to eye with you. I'm not going to say a word about you. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to talk about this issue, and you'll see somebody, and here's one that I see from both sides. You'll see somebody recruiting from a MAGA hat rally to try and make libertarians out of them. And then you'll see somebody at a Bernie Sanders rally and try to make libertarians out of them. And there is a compulsion for those two to fight with each other, because that's what the world wants to see. We want to see fighting, right? The media stopped talking about the Arbery trial when there was no fight, when it was very obvious what it was. It's not that it wasn't, and this totally goes with what the media's narrative is most of the time with Ahmaud Arbery. But even more important than narrative was the generation that fighting. When people stopped fighting about it because it became very obvious what that trial was, it stopped being in the news, right? It stopped being as interesting to everybody. They stuck with Rittenhouse because that's a little more controversial. That's the thing that fights more. You have to resist it, right? Because it's so easy. I get sucked in weekly. I defy the advice and intelligence that is being given to me right now in this episode that I already know ahead of time, and I mess it up like on a weekly basis. I'll get sucked into being like, you know what though? I've got a real zinger that's going to get like 8 people to like my comment. All right, I'm doing this, I don't know why. It's a dumb thing. I know it's because society's like got that pressure on me or whatever, but you got to step back. Like at some point you need to be able to say this. And I probably should even, like, just as a gut check to me personally, I kind of feel like the need I found to, like, when somebody's like, oh, I talked to this guy, for me to be like, well, I don't get along with that guy so much, but I don't even need to say that, probably. Like, I should probably stop saying the people that I don't like at all, because I just don't care. They're doing their thing. I can do my thing if we don't work well together. What's important is I identify the people that I do work well with, and then we actually make something of ourselves, that we can actually build something. And it takes, here's the thing. Because libertarians, you're never going to be able to get people to stop fighting, right? We scream at the people who cause the fights. They're not going to listen, because they generate their views with fighting. They fail. They won't work if we stop fighting, okay? Their whole business model is based on fighting. And so you can't reach out to them. When we talk about stop fighting, there's no reaching them. So what you need to understand, if you're listening to this, I'm probably talking to you, which is to say they're going to try and start a fight. You need to walk away. You need to be the one that's like, you do your thing, I'm going to do my thing.
Turn the other cheek, so to speak.
You need to turn the other cheek.
That's the Christian success reference.
It's but it's tactical. Like I think, and
triggering Brian's Satanism.
I could go on a hardcore I know, Jacob, we're still on for a pacifism podcast. One of these days we'll talk about it. But like there's a tactical element to this, to saying I'm walking away not because I'm going to lose a fight or because I'm scared or because I'm scared of what my values don't hold water. Because that's, of course, what they're going to say, right? Anytime you walk away or you block somebody because they're being a douche, they're like, oh, well, they just couldn't handle it. They couldn't deal with the truth. They couldn't handle my facts. I just owned them. No, I don't like you. I just decided to walk away.
What took more strength and what was the right move? Could Luke have just struck down the Emperor, or was it better for him to throw his weapon down?
Yes.
That's one of my favorite. I mean, that movie was really formative to me as a child because of that, all the lessons and archetypes taught there. One last thing I wanted to say on the subject, and this is an analogy I used when I was on the Libertarian Christian Institute's podcast last week, was there was a question asked to me about like, well, is there something morally inconsistent about like working with people if they don't share your values on something important? Like, it's like, well, could we work with somebody on criminal justice reform if we think abortion's murder and they don't? And that's a divisive issue in libertarian circles. But to me, it's just like, I don't really know if a disagreement matters when it comes to working on common goals. And the analogy I used was like, if there's somebody pinned under a car and the person next to me can help me lift the car up to rescue the person underneath of it, disagrees with me on something fundamental, like that might be important in different contexts, but it's not important in that context.
Yeah.
And it's like, you have to recognize the context. It's like, now listen, if I'm, out there as a Christian trying to, put out my perspectives on abortion or trying to work to, I don't know, like there's definitely contexts where like we wouldn't be good partners, but, I do like the analogy you use, Hodey, which is like, we have to be good coworkers, and we have to recognize that like when we're working on a job site, what matters the most is the job that we're doing, not like that we, it's like, can a Ravens fan and a Steelers fan work together, or can someone that's a Ohio fan work with somebody who's an Alabama fan? It's like, or Michigan fan or whatever.
Michigan.
So I mean, it's like, I mean, yeah, you guys can fight all you want, but when it comes to getting the job done, that's
right. You're doing a blood drive together.
Yeah.
It doesn't. Yeah. Relax.
80% of us can take somebody who's politically against us for some of our most deeply held topics, and none of us will care. In fact, we're probably already doing it already. So there's 20% of us, I'm guessing, that probably would want to feel, oh, I don't feel safe with this person who dares want to have somebody, like have term limits, or maybe wouldn't exactly vote for the same person that I was going to vote for. Those people tend to work themselves out of the business. So,
Brian, hit us with your piece of your mind.
My piece of my mind actually didn't come to me tonight until about 6:45, 7 o'clock Eastern tonight. When I flipped the channel after the wife and I were watching The Love Boat. Yes, the rerun. Yes, we were just seeing it was on TV, and that was on. So we watched it. It was a nice flashback to 40 years ago. But anyhow, watching that, I flipped over to 60 Minutes. And normally I don't watch 60 Minutes because it's usually some sort of fluff piece. And I caught it right in the middle of them talking about the remake of West Side Story. But two interesting stories popped up afterwards. First one was about Reality Winner and her life after prison, which was kind of surprising. Because number one, usually CBS likes to carry water for a lot of government agencies. And for them to interview Reality Winner and give her a pretty balanced interview about her life in prison and after prison was really kind of refreshing. So she talked about how she had suffered in prison because basically no one cared about her. That she's still seen as a criminal, even though what she did was expose basically whistleblowing of the crimes that were going on by the government. And my wife, who is as apolitical as anyone on the planet can be, goes to me and says, why was she ever in jail if she was pointing out what the government was doing wrong? And I said, that's the problem. And she goes, but then why was she in jail? And I said, because the government got ticked off because she exposed them. And that's the bigger issue. So it was nice to see that on 60 Minutes, of course, after West Side Story, not before. But the next piece was about China and the crackdown on capitalism by the leadership inside of China. And it was funny just to watch them bring on two different totally diverse-minded people with no third party in the middle, obviously. One person who was Trump's former national security advisor, and on the other side, a kind lady who teaches at the London School of Economics, and her father is the president, CEO of the largest bank in China. You can guess where that conversation went, which gets right back to what they were playing to. They were playing to both sides in this case. You either got the MAGA people who are going, China is very evil, which they pretty much are. And then, of course, the lady who was sitting there saying, well, it's just a light crackdown. It's only to be more fair. And it was hilarious to watch her use the more equitable, and we're just simply going after the 1%. It's pretty sad when that's starting to become a global thing, because amazingly, the 1% are the ones that are still getting away with things. If we look at the Maxwell trial and the list of people that are in Jeffrey Epstein's black book, it's pretty extensive. How many trips did Bill Clinton take, and Trump and all these other celebrities take? Not getting a lot of press on that. So tonight was just refreshing to see a little bit of news reporting going on a major show like that. And hopefully they'll do more of it, but I'm sure next week will be the scourge of libertarians and why we need to scruff them out. So
domestic terrorists.
Exactly. Domestic terrorists who apparently are in various stages of growing beards and need to be, scourge of this planet, whatever. I just, yeah, that's what I saw tonight. So I just thought it was interesting.
You watch higher brow programming than a lot of us, but I'm glad you do. I am always shocked. There's this book called 3 Felonies a Day.
Yep. I love that book.
It's not what you think. The book is actually kind of about high profile cases. Sometimes you don't even sympathize for the defendants all that much, but the prosecutor kind of makes a ruling, which then becomes the new law. And then all of a sudden they use that law and it's against somebody that's widely disliked most of the time or very unpopular. And then all of a sudden they can make that ruling against a million little people. So they hit one big powerful person with it. And the person who wrote the book was, very high powered defendant. I actually was very surprised the people he'd represented. I was like, I've heard of some of these cases. This is wild. Like the Martha Stewart, insider trading thing was in there and was like, you think you're punishing Martha Stewart in the insider trading. And it's not fair that these rich people get away with this and do what she did or whatever. And so that unpopularity will happen. And then since then, what happens? It gets over felonized. Pretty much everybody does the version of what Martha Stewart did. And suddenly your average Joe Schmo who's using Webull on his app to trade stocks is doing some insider trading when he talks to his friend who works at a steel plant, and it's like, oh, now you're busted. And this is the thing. This is how government grows. And it starts usually by targeting somebody you want punished because they are incredibly unpopular. Yep. And we've seen this even recently in the Libertarian Party by, being like, hey, we're kicking this person out. They're unpopular, and we've seen both sides do this, right? To be like, I think we can get rid of these
people.
More
to a couple of those stories. Sorry,
Hodey. Sure. I mean, whatever.
It's more of a weekly news coverage.
Yeah, weekly, kind of. Right. But the thing is it's like, okay, you open the gate and now it's, as Jacob said, it's weekly news coverage. You start with one. You have you have this policy. You make an exception that is valid to everybody.
Are you saying that power that I advocate for against my enemy can be weaponized by my enemy against me? Yeah. Wow, I wish there was some group of people that espoused some political philosophy that taught that very lesson.
I'm trying to make this sound big and important, but that is pretty much the gist of it. That's the thing. You give away this power and it gets used against you. Like at first it seems really popular and you say like, you know what, I can look the other way on this because that person is fill in the blank. Again, that 3 Felonies a Day book is a good one if you want to see the kind of thing where it's like, yeah, it's these rich 1%ers that get punished and you want to see them punished. And so then what happens to them? Well, they have to pay $1 million fee, or they have to resign or something like that. But now you've got this established law that the common man doesn't have $1 million, can't just sit there and resign. They get to go to jail. They actually have bodily harm potentially done to them. They have their assets seized. Civil asset forfeiture once started by targeting the mob, right? And people don't like the mob for a good reason, right? The mob was doing some heinous things, but what happens? You pass a law, you say it's okay, and then all of a sudden that law, like you said, is getting used against you. Dark Sage has a question for this panel about weaponizing things against people. I tell you what, you ask real quick, and we'll probably get to it here. Jacob, I'll let you have your thoughts about what Brian had to say.
Not much, but kind of interrupted you to put at them a little bit. I mean, it's, I don't know. I don't pay too much attention to the mainstream media or watch a lot of TV news and stuff. So, I can't say too much about how good or bad the news coverage is about different things. I do think in general, I think there tends to be one of those things where it's like some people are very it's true in a general sense that the media is corruptible, and there's an element of the media that's like the things they report on are skewed and inaccurate and all that. But that doesn't mean that if people don't show up in large force in society to demand the truth on something, that the media can hide it. Like, we can work the incentives to demand that the media report the truth on something if we, as a society, push in that direction. I think we've seen that happen sometimes, a few key times over the past couple years. So it's always important to remember that. And I always like that movie. It's a really underrated Disney Pixar movie from the 90s, Bug's Life. And I remember the scene where the cockroaches are, or the crickets or
grasshoppers.
Grasshoppers. That's what the grasshoppers are all talking, and they're like, "Oh, why do we even need to go back and bully these ants again? I mean, it's just too much work." And the one's like, "No, we have to constantly remind them of what a threat we are, because the minute they realize that there's more of them than us, we're screwed." And then that's how the movie ends: is the ants realize, oh, there's a lot more of us than there is of them. And so, the media is not trustworthy. The politicians, the special interest groups, not trustworthy. And yet at the same time, we can sometimes make these entities out to be a bigger boogeyman than they are, because we're still operating under this fallacy that they actually have all of this power, when really they only have power that we have forfeited to them because we act as if we are a minority when we aren't.
Yeah, I mean, if they can get away with it, they will. All right, let's go ahead and take a crack at this question here, just because it got asked, and I'm excited to get asked a question. Yeah. I noticed how today every Democrat out there likes to label Trump and his supporters as racist and xenophobic, but yet I am curious now they explain or defend the actions of people like George Wallace, Andrew Jackson, Woodrow Wilson, and policies and followers they had and the violent racist things they did. My question is simple. How come Democrats today never talk about these people, and why do they seemingly act like those people are not what they actually were?
I've got the theory on this one. Number one, the flip, which is the big one, that the parties flipped sides when it comes to race issues back in the 60s with the civil rights laws that were passed. So that's the first part. The second part is I really don't hear a lot of Woodrow Wilson, Jackson, things like that. They always slap that into well, that's how things were. But they still idolize FDR. Now, FDR was pretty terrible. He did a couple of good things. Yeah, I know. Hard to believe. The internment camps, stealing money from people, kind of, all those horrible things. But those are glossed over. And that's exactly what happens, is that there's just a lot of glossing over. There's a lot of glossing over of everybody's past. I mean, Remember, George W. Bush was Hitler. They had pictures of him. They had pictures of Bob Dole as a Nazi. They had pictures of Mitt Romney as a Nazi. I mean, And then everybody just kind of conveniently forgets it. Oh, it's all over. Oh, McCain was a Nazi too. I remember that. Remember, he was the maverick of the Senate because, well, he was doing good for us at whatever time it was. Politicians have a memory like goldfish. It lasts about 30 seconds, and they occasionally hold on to something that may drag them, to something more interesting. So they never will defend it because they're going to say that's the past. This is what now is. They see themselves a lot smarter than a lot of people see themselves smarter now. And this goes both for not only Democrats, but also MAGA Republicans as well, that they're much smarter than they were back then. We're way smarter. But the reality is we're not. We have the same intelligent IQ levels as our forefathers did, and going back generations as well. So it's just better information.
Yep.
And that's the key point right there. So they're never going to not defend. I mean, they're going to either dismiss it or they're going to go full FDR.
The Democrats like to talk about FDR the way Republicans like to talk about Lincoln.
Reagan.
Yeah.
Reagan.
Yeah,
Reagan's probably better. It's the funny thing is that there were a lot. I grew up in Reagan times, and so did Reinhold as well. So, well, there may be an assumption that isn't exactly accurate here, but it's a question, Dennis, and I think we answered it, and hopefully we answered. At least I answered my portion of it.
For them, and I think it's an observation. This isn't a matter of opinion. This is just somebody observing that their Democratic friends that call Trump racist and xenophobic. I mean, let's get more recent with it. You can put together the most racist thing Trump has ever said against. I mean, and I promise, if you find the most racist things Joe Biden has ever said, those are worse. I mean, it's just Joe Biden has said objectively worse
or about their policies. What's the differences between their policies that's significant and it makes any difference to immigrants coming into our country right now?
And Dennis, Kennedy would not allow to be a Democrat. He would be a hardcore Republican. If we're really going to go there and say Reagan wouldn't be in the GOP, Kennedy would never be a Democrat. So it's going back.
Like said, history, like you said, Brian, is very fickle about these things. I mean, it is just, there is not much consistency, especially among politicians. So it's funny because we'll craft somebody up to be one thing and then find out another thing. So, I mean, and nobody's above it. Like Dark Sage, to answer your question here, I really want to establish that this is just a human thing. Like Calvin Coolidge is probably the most libertarian president ever, and he signed a bill that forbade Eastern Europeans from entering the U.S. in certain numbers because of all that scary Eastern European blood that was tainted, and the white Slavic blood might actually accidentally mingle with it, right? And that was superior, blood. Anyway, like it's just like the not Slavic, it's the Scandinavian blood or whatever it was. I forget what they called it. It's like the Vikings. What were they called?
Scandinavian? Well, I mean, it's
Celtic,
Scandinavian.
I'll have to disagree with you, Hodey. Functionally, the most libertarian president was William Henry Harrison because he only had 31 days.
Yeah, I was going to say. Well, and exactly. No, I'm going to agree with him. I'm going to agree with him on this because he went outside, refused to listen to anyone, talked for hours, and then died from a freaking easily treatable illness. Bingo.
Oh my gosh.
Most libertarian president ever.
Yeah, I just think that like for me, I think the thing is we look back, and even on recent history, I mean, you can look as recent as the George W. Bush, talking about immigration, to just see like he would not probably fit very well in the Republican Party today. And he's still alive. Like he's around, you know what I mean? And like, it's just, and then just like Joe Biden and the Democrats, if he was saying that stuff about not wanting, his kids growing up in a racial jungle, and all that stuff, like, I mean, and that's not even the worst of it. I haven't compiled like a list, but there's some really bad Joe Biden stuff out there about race that they don't know about. So like the thing is everybody has a certain thing, right? Like I really love history. So like the people, when you talk about George Wallace, Andrew Jackson, Woodrow Wilson, when I was in debate, history was my first go-to because I could usually find some historical event that made my weird position look good. Even if I didn't like my position in speech and debate, I could usually find some historical evidence that my way was correct, right? And so like the thing is like we all have these perspectives that matter more than certain other things. And they place different amounts of priority to them. So the thing is certain libertarians might be willing to make that immigration thing for Coolidge go away. Like, why don't we talk about that when we talk about all the other good things that Coolidge did? Well, most libertarians want to gloss over it, right? Just like most Democrats want to gloss over certain things. Now, they're cool to throw people like Jefferson under the bus, as Reinhold brings up. And sure, there's certain ones that kind of history has not made them look good. And there's been, everything has looked bad in hindsight for them. And I think people have changed their tune on it. The Republicans have a few of those as well. Like, I mean, it's just, where they say like, yeah, this guy is a Republican, but, we hate him now. I mean, things turn pretty bad. Teddy Roosevelt, I guess, is one that kind of Republicans don't like, right? He was like the first progressive and, and he was one that Republicans did like. And then people found out about him. And then they're like, what's this about the Food and Drug and National Park? I hate that guy. Screw that guy. So like they kind of got wind. There's a few historical figures that people throw under the bus. But generally, we all tend to have these blinders on because we want something to be true. And here's the other thing. And I'm not going to, Darksage, your point is very good. I'm just explaining why it happens. Another point that I want to bring up on this is that it a lot of times it's like, well, I like the Green New Deal. I don't care about the internment camps. Or the internment camps were bad, but I don't see how that relates to the Green New Deal. So the reason they're not talking about these things is because they say, or not Green New Deal, the regular New Deal. My brain. Anyway, they like the New Deal.
I was like, wait, what?
Anyway, what's going on here, Hodes? Yeah, no. So they like the New Deal, right? And so when you say something like, well, what about the internment camps? They're just going to be like, well, I don't care. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't have anything to do with this. Like, so for example, I like Calvin Coolidge because of what he did to, counter the 1919 recession with free markets and bringing down taxes and stuff like that. When somebody's like, what about his stuff on immigration? Doesn't he suck now? Jacob, we just talked about this with Jacob earlier. I could fight about this forever, or I could just be like, yeah, that sucked. But the reason I like the guy is because of this. When I really like the life and I like the story of George Washington a lot, right? Like I find him an inspirational character. I love the way he thought about things. I thought he had some good humility. I'm aware he was a slave-owning piece of crap and deserves to answer for all of those slaves that he owned. But when I say I like George Washington and somebody's like, oh, because he was a slaver? It's like, well, no. Like, I mean, people sucked. I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry. Am I only allowed to point to Jesus Christ now for like examples of good people? Because if that's it, we're going to have a very flat and static conversation. Everybody's got these negative issues with him, Anyhow, Jacob, you didn't get much say on this one. I'll let you have some say. Brian, after that, you can wrap it up and then we'll go home.
I don't have much to say. I think I made most of my points through cracking jokes in between what you were saying. I mean, the only other joke I'll add to it is to illustrate my thoughts even further is my favorite joke to tell people was that the only Republican I've ever voted for is Hillary Clinton.
That's good. That's good. Well,
that's a rough one.
Yeah. So I like this, what Darksage is saying here, actually. For example, at this one, I asked the suspended Democrat. My tennis response was, well, we passed civil rights, so we did help African Americans. And he never acknowledged for Democrats that divide and segregate many African Americans. Well, there's plenty of history that just wasn't a Democrat thing. That was a Republican Democrat societal thing, is just across the board. So any political party giving themselves a backslap for passing the civil rights legislation is probably fundamentally dishonest at its best. Both Democrats and Republicans have put a lot of these policies in place. So I wouldn't do a lot of backslapping on saying how awesome one party is or the other. And this includes libertarians too. We've screwed up enough things, but we haven't been in control. So give us some time and we can screw things up too. And then you can blame us.
That's our new slogan. That is the new catchphrase of the Libertarian Party. Give us a chance to screw things up for a change.
Right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. If you listen, Jacob, I appreciate you hopping in for Lou at the last second here. She needed a break, and we love having you. Great conversation. You also bring along a fun and lively crowd that loves your guts. I'm a little irritated that everybody loved you so much.
I really love Sam Whiplinger went through the efforts to, while we were talking, to make the Romans 13 shirt for me, which I will now grift the heck out of and sell for money. Because capitalism.
And then what we'll do is we'll find like Ryan Lindsay or the biggest lib sock in the world to wear it and get a picture taken. We'll raise all the funds for charity.
Oh my gosh! And then I'll hug him.
Anarchy. This looks perfect.
And then I'll hug him because I have.
There we go.
Right, for charity. Jacob and Ryan Lindsay hugging for charity. Boy, you'd have to have a hefty price for Ryan to be part of that. But I'm excited to see what that price is. I
love Ryan. Ryan just doesn't love me, but it's okay. I love him enough for the both of us.
You know what? Based on what we said tonight, I'm not even going to give my thoughts on Ryan Lindsay. I love him and I hope for the best.
I do as well.
All right, everybody, kisses. Have a great night, and we will talk to you later.